Top 10 plus albums and EPs of 2023. Introduction. 2023 in music. 2023 was an insane year for music, which I just now realize is also the same first clause as the last blog. But it really was. It was a little lighter on the EPs than the last couple years have been, but the album releases went pretty bonkers. There were so many great albums released last year, it was a struggle to narrow this thing down to a top 10. In fact, I didn't even do that. Much to the chagrin of this rankings title, this list is made up of 25 albums, 10 for the ranking, 5 honorable mentions, and 10 more passing mentions besides, 6 EPs, 5 for the ranking, 1 honorable mention, and 7 singles, technically 6 for the ranking, 1 honorable mention. Although I did not initially look back on the year super fondly beyond a handful of releases, when compiling my lists over the start of the new year, I realized that I could not cut down this list to 10. At first, I thought it'd be easy, cutting out the albums I didn't care for or enjoy very much, at least not enough to be top 10. But then I realized I had nearly 30 albums I thought were top 10 worthy. So now we have this mess I've landed myself in. Thankfully, the EPs and singles are fairly easily consolidated, as you'll see, but the albums were definitely not easy to rank. I'd bet that anybody else who listened to 50 plus albums this year, in the realm of music I tend to reside anyway, is feeling the struggle just as much as I am. Part 0. Organization of the list. So, you might be wondering how the hell I plan to include everything in this video. Simply put, I wish I didn't have to, but I'm doing the best I can with the plate I placed before myself. If it isn't the consequences of my own actions. First, I will go over the passing mentions I hinted at, 10 albums I really wanted to include on this list somewhere. These will only have 1, maybe 2 sentences apiece dedicated to them for time's sake. After that, I will move into the honorable mentions, 5 albums, 1 EP, and 1 single that didn't make their respective main lists, but very well could have if the year weren't so damn stacked, particularly where albums are concerned, clearly. Following these, I will rank the first half of my favorite albums, number 10 to number 6, with a short paragraph to accompany them. Again, I don't want to waste too much time here, so if I don't have more than a few sentences to say off the top of my head, that's all I'm going to keep them at. Next up will be the singles, individual tracks that I really loved and want to shout out as being on repeat this year. Again, only a few sentences for each of these. Then will come the next batch of the top 10 albums, number 5 through number 2. Yes, there is the intention to keep you on edge a little bit before number 1, but there will also be another reason for that, which you'll see come the right time. Before the final number 1 album of 2023 reveal, however, I'll go over the 5 EPs I want to shout out this year as well. Thank you for checking out this video. I'm sorry it's already taken so long just to get to what you're here for, but without any more nonsense to weigh down this ranking, I provide you with my very scuffed top 10 plus albums and EPs of 2023. Part 0.5, Passing Mentions. To start off, let's get the 10 passing mentions out of the way. I'll simply list each item with 1 sentence to accompany it, just to blaze through these as quickly as I can. Remember, this year was insane for music, and narrowing it down to even this list was tough. I'm sorry to not be giving all these a better shout individually, but there's no way I can justify that with how much more there is to cover. Super Bloom by Silent Planet. I've always had the unpopular opinion that Silent Planet are overrated and not my thing, but Super Bloom might just be what converts me. Anno 1696 by Insomnium. Not as strong as their previous full album, but a lot better on a re-listen. Admittedly, one of the songs with a feature, I forget which one, really doesn't work and so keeps the album from being stronger overall. Blood Omen by The Raven Age. Not quite as infectiously catchy and rewarding as their 2019 record, but The Raven Age is good heavy metal fun if you're not one for unclean vocals. Ashen by Humanity's Last Breath. Though I was initially underwhelmed by all but 1 or 2 tracks, the soundscape and stylistic decisions are still stuck in my head. I feel the incessant need to return to this one. Zweilig by Mental Cruelty. My apologies for probably butchering that pronunciation. Ever since Lorna Shore really struck gold with the blackened deathcore thing a few years ago, other bands have been following suit. This record feels like the most interesting and enjoyable version of the style in the time since then. ICU by Citizen Soldier. I always underrate these guys until I give them another listen. Their music is super impactful, even though I haven't struggled with my mental health issues for a while, and they have proved invaluable to those that do, though they are hard rock and not metal the way the rest of this list is. Hope by NF. Speaking of non-metal, I didn't love Hope as much as the last couple releases, but there are 5 or so phenomenal songs that make it worth the mention. Death Below by August Burns Red. Last winter lasted so long, I thought this album came out in 2022, but even so, Death Below is good and consistent ABR the way they always are. The Beautiful Dark of Life by Atreyu. It turns out I've been sleeping on this band. Although there are a few songs I really don't care for or that didn't go anywhere, I enjoyed Gone and I enough to include this as a mention. Burn in the Flood Deluxe by Our Hollow Our Home. I include this as a technicality since the original release came out in 2022. Following the departure of all the band members besides Tobias Young, this deluxe edition came out with like 6 to 7 new songs that all slapped, and the full bundle reminded me that the original album release was better than maybe I originally gave it credit for. Part 1, Honorable Mentions. Single, Leave Me Behind by Never Stops Breaking. A friend of mine finally started releasing his music this year. If you really enjoy alt metal a la Breaking Benjamin, give Never Stops Breaking a shot. Leave Me Behind is my favorite of the singles so far, and I look forward to the full album drop in 2024. EP, Slow Roses by George Reagan the Dead Son. George Reagan, better known as Johnny Three Tears from Hollywood Undead, has this solo project that I quite enjoy for what it is. This EP is pretty solid, even better than the full album a couple years back, and even gets a little bit heavier than that album did. Wide variety on this short track list that I think is worth checking out for fans of J3T's singing voice, which I am. Albums. Number 5, Night Sphere by Heritoire. One of my brothers randomly sent this album to me shortly-ish after it came out, and though it isn't one of the most standout records from the year, after a couple of rotations, I really liked it, and I want to return to it often. Plus, the color scheme of the cover is really great. Number 4, Blackout by From Ashes to New. Mostly, I loved the way this album mixed the more recent era of From Ashes to New while making it heavy and riffy and breakdowny in ways the band hasn't been since a decade ago. If you want more of my thoughts on this album, I have a full review linked below. Number 3, Godlike, CJ's version by Thy Art Is Murder. This ranking has nothing to do with the controversy associated with the band and or CJ that took place around the release of Godlike. Between CJ's version and the re-recording, I have to say that CJ's is my preference sonically, plus it is the band's, and CJ's best performance for several album cycles anyway, hence why it is included here. Number 2, Revilement by Euclid. The album starts to feel a tiny bit repetitive and one note by the last few songs, but I adore the sound of this record and what this band is doing otherwise. Made of former members of many juggernauts in the scene, including Shadow of Intent, there's something here for people who want crushing in their deathcore-inspired music. Number 1, Foregone by In Flames. I didn't even realize this album came out until a couple weeks ago. I listened to it and realized finally what it is people love about this band. Apparently it's their best release in a little while, and I can see why people feel this way. It reminds me a lot of what I love in Trivium's earlier material. As an example, in an alternative universe, I could see In Flames being the frontrunner in my metal obsession, getting into the heavier side of things, instead of Trivium, just based on the vibe of this record. Part 2, the first half. Number 10, Feral by Left to Suffer. I've never been one to be horribly caught up in the Left to Suffer hype, but this album is solid. I like that it's fairly short, brief, and doesn't waste the listener's time. Only 8 tracks in 25 minutes makes for an average of barely more than 3 minutes per song. Each one is a headbanging bop and worth a random throw on when you only have a half hour before work. Number 9, Exol by Ne Obliviscaris. Again, apologies for the pronunciation. I actually discovered this album by accident, and admit I haven't listened to the full thing super often this year, but it stands very tall in my memory because of how unique it is, even in the prog sphere. Of course, that could be me talking out my ass, but it certainly sounded different than what I typically listen to. The main reason this is on here, though, is because of the duology of songs, Misericord, which I'm very sorry for mispronouncing. In English, it means mercy. Part 1 entitled As the Flesh Falls, and especially Part 2 entitled Anatomy of Quiescence. are fantastic. The second part especially is just such a joy to listen to from a musical perspective that I feel bad for basically forgetting this record exists. My only real gripe is that I don't love the vocals. Number 8, Calma by Calma. I've never been an incredibly huge fan of Melodeath or related music, but Calma is one of the bands I've had in my following feed on Spotify since a brother introduced me to a few of their classic songs from back in the day. I genuinely enjoyed this album a lot and found myself listening to it 3 or 4 times in the couple of weeks after its release. It was this album that has finally convinced me that I need to listen to their legacy material in full. Number 7, War of Being by Tesseract. If I have any album on this list I'm outright ashamed I didn't listen to more, it's this one. Hell, if there's any band featured in this list that I'm ashamed I didn't go back and do the full discography for in the time since it dropped, it's Tesseract. Thank you to Tokyo, one of my friends, for raising a little bit of awareness to them for me, even if I haven't gone back to older material yet. War of Being is a journey, just of the kind I love as a general enthusiast of concept albums, and the material there is to dig into with this one is immense, especially with the vocalist's interview with Apple Music in Context, where he dives a bit deeper into each individual song. I need to listen to this one again, and I need to listen to more of this band for sure. Number 6, The Death We Seek by Currents. On a first listen, this album absolutely slaps. It's not quite as replayable for me as The Way It Ends was, hence its exclusion from the top 5, but The Death We Seek has some incredible moments, just as always. The heavies go freaking crazy on this one, and I love that. Also, one of the dopest album covers of the year, in my opinion. Part 3, The Singles. Number 5, Godspeed by Betraying the Martyrs. As a farewell single to the band, it's hard to pick one that goes harder than this one does. There are a couple melodies and rhythms that just refuse to leave my head once they get in there, but the potential for this band with this newer vocalist was immense, and paid off to great extent with this release. I'm sad to see these guys go, but I'm glad they went out with such an insanely epic bang as this. Number 4, Crown of Thorns by Vicious Rain. This track has a solid argument going for it being Riff of the Year. Just straight up, it hits so hard and the rest of the song complements it in the best yet most unexpected ways possible. For a band just forming in 2023, these guys have quite the future ahead of them with the attention they're getting and the talent on display already. Here's to a full album in 2024. Number 3, Predestination Paradox and I Found the Dark Side of Heaven by Like Moths to Flames. Sorry, I'm not going to pick a favorite between these two songs. I don't know why I love this band so much, but all of their 2020s material has been a slam dunk for me, and these two singles are no different. I couldn't explain why they work for me, but they do. I just love what these guys have been doing for the last few years, and I can't wait to hear more. Number 2, Ghost by If I Were You. Technically, Wither is my favorite of the singles released for If I Were You's 2024 album With or Without, which has already come out by the time this ranking releases, as well as a review I did for it too. But Ghost is my favorite of the 2 singles released in 2023. Something about the singles for this record are very catchy and fun while still getting pretty heavy at times too, and I loved what the full album had in store for me. With or Without is already an Album of the Year contender come this time next year too. Number 1, Red by Woe Is Me. Not gonna lie, I low-key hate the fairly obvious messaging behind the lyrics of this song, but the song itself is so incredibly good, I can't not be hooked to it anyway. Like, give me a break. This thing has like 4 or 5 breakdowns depending on where you draw the line between a riff and a breakdown, as my favorite blech of the year, and the chorus is catchier than damn near anything released this entire decade so far, let alone 2023. Besides, I can twist the lyrics to mean whatever I want them to mean, even if it's just copium making me wish they weren't so blatantly clear in the first place. Part 4, Most of the Second Half. Number 5, Descent by Orbit Culture. If you want to know a little bit more about my thoughts on Descent, you can find them in my Orbit Culture discography ranking video that I did earlier this year. A link can be found below. The general consensus is that Descent continues the trend that 2021's Shaman sets forth following 2020's Ninja, which I happened to say wrong through that entire video I came to realize. My apologies. I love most everything this band has put out, and this record is no different. It isn't quite so consistently mind-blowingly amazing as Nija was, but there are some very good songs here. If you enjoy what this band is doing, you have no reason to not love this record. Number 4, Heavener by Invent Animate. Honestly, I am a little surprised this album is appearing on the list at all, let alone so high up. For the majority of this band's career, I've been the wet blanket that was like, it's fine, I guess, I'll never listen to it again. Every album was that way. Even when I liked Greyview more than the first two albums, it still wasn't enjoyable enough to warrant a full album experience to me. If you go back and check out my blog post for my top albums and EPs of 2021, you'll find that the single/EP entitled The Sun Sleeps As If It Never Was really struck gold for me. I loved the brevity of it and how it actually made me feel something incredible when the band had never managed to do so before. Then the singles for Heavener were a pretty big mixed bag for me. I really enjoyed one or two, but the others I found to be, again, pretty mediocre and overrated. I thought the same thing when I listened to the full album, but returning to it a few more times has solidified for me the brilliance of this work. There are several songs on Heavener that just hit different, the same way The Sun Sleeps As If It Never Was did a few years ago. I'm glad I've finally been able to come around to this band. Also, I suppose the single Heavener they released 6 months after the album could have had a place on the singles portion of this list, but that was a tight race that I didn't want to drag out to 10 singles. Anyway, let's move on to the top 3. Number 3, Fatalism by Polaris. Fatalism is a record I will probably have a strange relationship with over time. I'm almost always a full album kind of person, but the combined singles of Overflow, Nightmare, and Inhumane really hit me. I loved those songs, and I played them on repeat in a way I basically never do for anything else. The album itself is also very good, but I do see myself returning to those singles over time more often than this entire record for some reason. I can't really say why, but that's how I think I feel about it for now. If you want to know more about my thoughts on this one, I did a full review, which I will link below. Number 2, Periphery 5, Gent is Not a Genre by Periphery. It's no P4, but it's solid, and if you want to see how I rank this in comparison to the rest of the band's work, I have a discography ranking for that on my blog as well, which I will be recording as a video somewhat like this in the near future. Huge missed opportunity on spelling genre with a DJ to match the word gent, but whatever. P5 has some of Periphery's strangest and boldest material, which is saying something, and combines it all to be something very fun at times, pissed at others, and just straight up hilarious at more. Draculgra is my personal favorite from the album and one of my favorites from the band in general. Do be warned though, this album is very different structurally than they usually are. But even so, if you like Periphery, you'll like this. If you don't like Periphery, this is most definitely not going to change your mind. Part 5, the EPs. Number 5, Live and Die by Sail's End. Given that this meme of a subgenre some of my friends and I like to call Debellicore is one of my favorites, and all reliable if you will, I felt like I had to include Glass Crown or Before I Turn or Sail's End or something similar somewhere. So this is that inclusion. Check it out if you like Before I Turn. Number 4, Impressions of the Bizarre and the Uncanny by Poltergeist. I only know of these guys because of that Nick Nocturnal video about unknown bands, and this one sat well with me. It's pretty fun if you're into that somewhat Thal-inspired core music, if a tad repetitive and maybe a cumulative 5 minutes too long. Number 3, The Fear of Fear by Spirit Box. Some are sure to call blasphemy on this not being number 1, but it's not quite up there. The band's most consistent release for me ever, I finally overall enjoyed an end product EP or album from start to finish, even if Cellar Door is one of the most overrated tracks of the year. Sorry, not sorry. I like every song here, and the full EP includes some new favorites to rival even Blessed Be and Holy Roller. Jaded and Angel Eyes are those rivals for what it's worth. Also, I'm not much of a music video person, but the music video for Ultraviolet was just transfixing. Number 2, Songs of the Dusk by Insomnium. This is one of the most immersive and enriching listens of the year, hands down. Insomnium has slowly shifted over the past decade to be somewhat a little more vibey, with the atmosphere and ambiance being just as much if not more a draw than the riffs. Songs of the Dusk is the perfect example of this very thing. It's 22 minutes long and only 3 tracks telling you what the focus of this is in its soundscape. It feels like it's harkening back to Argent Moon in ways, but I think is an overall better capture on that idea. If you have any interest in melodeath, especially on the quieter side of things, I think this is an easy way to get just that. Number 1. The Forgotten by Orbit Culture. Unfortunately, this EP came out after I did the Orbit Culture discography ranking, and I never got the opportunity to quickly review this thing, but for a 3-song, 18-minute release, this thing smacks like a train. The single they released to announce the EP drop, While We Serve, is potentially my favorite Orbit Culture song ever, alongside the likes of North Star Amnesia. The second song, Upheaval, is a little different for the band stylistically, but still quite fun. And Sound of the Bell, albeit a bit long, is an epic closer to rival many of the band's best, being a mostly instrumental track that gets to focus on this aspect more than Orbit Culture usually does. This might be one of the best places to start with the band if you've never listened to them. Give The Forgotten a chance, alongside North Star Amnesia, specifically. Part 6, The Winners. Number 1, The Surface by Beartooth, and Take Me Back to Eden by Sleep Token. So this is the reason my number 1 pick is separate. It's 2 different albums at the same time. I also get the impression that most people are going to laugh their asses off at this reveal. Some for Beartooth, some for Sleep Token, some for both. But frankly, I don't really care, especially since these records satisfy in completely different ways. I live for The Surface and the meaning of the lyrics. It's tied with Disease for my favorite record from the band because this one lyrically is just goals and a half, and I can't help but love it all and blast it all the time to cheer up. While Disease I enjoy a little bit more musically, but don't really relate to as much lyrically anymore. If you want more on my thoughts of this record, I have a review for this one too. Speaking of, my very first album review for the year and this channel was on Take Me Back to Eden, my other number 1. Not only did this record get me back into a music critique mode, but it also blew me away when I was supposed to hate it. More on that in the review. Both of these albums are basically perfect to me, and I love the hell out of them. The Surface is my vibe, with nearly every song being a personal anthem. Take Me Back to Eden is for my more sophisticated ear that loves when things get heavy, but also appreciates the more groovy sides of things as well. Euclid might just be my song of the year, and that doesn't speak to how much I also adore tracks like Rain, all rivaling my favorites from The Surface, such as Riptide and The Better Me. Conclusion, what I learned. Well, that was a lot. Somehow I kept this under 5,000 words, but I think this definitely got to be long enough, perhaps even more so. Next year, I will anticipate doing my albums and then my EPs and singles lists separately, just in case I have another situation like this year where I just could not trim down the list, or at the very least did not want to. I had a great time with music this year, even if I developed tinnitus right as 2024 struck, most likely due to the music, and can't wait for another year of it. The music, not the tinnitus. Maybe it won't be so many back-to-back bangers this time around, but I have high hopes for several albums and can't wait to do a better job keeping track of them all specifically to make this list next year quicker. One final time, if you want to hear more about my Periphery and or Orbit Culture discography rankings, or my Beartooth, Polaris, Sleep Token, From Ashes to New, or even Avenged Sevenfold album reviews, I did not include Avenged Sevenfold anywhere on this list in case you think you might have missed something because you didn't. You can check all of those out in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you got through this whole thing somehow, I greatly admire and appreciate the time you gave to me. Hopefully it was also sort of worth it. For the gamers out there, I got another one of these coming in the next few weeks, so stay tuned for that. A top 10 for the games I played in 2023. The first and maybe only time I'll have played enough to make an actual top 10 rather than a top 5. Assuming any of you are into that kind of thing, I'll see you guys then.